Welcome back. We're following some breaking news. The Associated Press is reporting, according to a law enforcement official, that the death of Michael Jackson has been ruled a homicide. Law enforcement officials say Los Angeles County coroner ruling Michael Jackson's death a homicide. This, according to the AP. David is, of course, still here with me on this. And, David, we just reported that an affidavit of a search warrant was released. This was out of Houston, detailing what Dr. Conrad Murray told investigators, in part that he had given Michael Jackson propofol, that powerful sedative, for some time to sleep, so that he would sleep at night. He'd also given Michael Jackson a Valium. He, according to this report, feared, this is from the LA Times, feared that Michael Jackson was becoming addicted, but also admitted that he gave Michael Jackson a sedative. He left the room to call his Houston office and family members in return to see Michael Jackson unconscious. But right now, the Associated Press saying that law enforcement officials are ruling Michael Jackson's death a homicide. And this is big news because obviously that means charges here, David.
Absolutely. It puts so much pressure, Cameron, when the coroner is saying this was a homicide. And even though Dr. Murray may be saying, look, I was giving levels that I thought he could handle, when you have officials saying these were lethal doses, and you have the coroner saying that it was homicide, that Michael Jackson would not have died otherwise, it becomes one of these things that almost makes it inevitable now that Conrad Murray is going to be charged, and then he's going to have to make his defense in front of a court, in front of perhaps a homicide trial of some type.
And we've got Courtney Hazlett. She's been on top of this story, covering it from here as well as for many, many weeks in Los Angeles. Courtney, what do we make of this big development?
I don't think it comes as a massive surprise, that's for sure. And it does seem to, further point that Conrad Murray will be implicated in this. I've been pouring through the documents here, and there are so many interesting things. This is Michael Jackson was very familiar with Diprovan or propofol, this reveals. I mean, he referred to it as, quote, his milk, and referred to lidocaine, which was used in that final dilution that this affidavit says that Dr. Murray administered. He would call that, referred to that as, I don't want to misspeak here, but said that it helped the pain go away, and that happens when you have propofol in the injection sites. Another thing I noticed, too, was that Dr. Murray said in the affidavit that there was a point where he realized there were injection sites in Michael's hands and feet, and that certainly dovetails with reporting that I've had from people who were working on his wardrobing for his This Is It tour. They said, we don't understand where this was happening, where he was being injected, because we've looked at his arms. We have pictures from his costume fittings, and there are no marks on his arms. So it stands to reason then, based on the affidavit, that he was being injected in areas where you wouldn't normally see it easily, like his hands and feet. This is definitely surprising in terms of the timing. I don't think anybody expected this to happen today necessarily, that it would be deemed a homicide. But, when you start to read between the lines, and actually you don't have to read between the lines, you just have to read what's in this affidavit, it's very interesting that Dr. Conrad Murray had so many facts and knew exactly what he was doing and what he was administering, and chose to do so either way. And, unfortunately, Michael died, and now there's a very clear timeline of what transpired.
Courtney, would this suggest then that the coroner's report is about to be released, or maybe it'll be released in some form, perhaps with the investigation into Dr. Conrad Murray?
I can't begin to put myself in the head of the LA County Coroner's Office. They've certainly thrown some surprises our way already in terms of this case. However, now that we're getting so much information all at once, it definitely does work together with what I've been hearing behind the scenes, which is they didn't want one big part of the investigation coming out that would probably jeopardize another portion of the investigation. So it does stand to reason that perhaps we'll be hearing a lot more, especially given that this was unsealed and, not even an hour later, I think, if my timing isn't mistaken, it was ruled a homicide. So I think there's definitely a good chance.
And Courtney, a part of this investigation, we've seen them have raids at different pharmacies, but all along, of course, it's been much of the focus on Conrad Murray. He was there. He admits he was there. And in this affidavit, he says he left the room. What about all of the string of other doctors they were said to be looking at?
Well, there are definitely other doctors mentioned in this affidavit, Tamara. You make up a really good point. What I find to be interesting is they definitely found prescription medications that had been prescribed by Dr. Klein. That's one thing that separates Dr. Klein from the several other doctors who were listed in here, and that also explains why his offices were a focus most recently. Also, Michael Jackson's nurse, Sherilyn Lee, we've spoken to her here on MSNBC, and I've spoken to her personally a number of times. She's listed in here that Michael said that she was given giving him, quote, a cocktail. And I don't know what that means. I've called her and asked her to explain that in a little bit more detail. But Murray is now saying, this is what Michael Jackson told me. This is the information I was given. And so the fact that he was given this information that somebody was giving him a cocktail to just help him feel better does make you realize that Dr. Murray was asking questions along the way. However, he might have been satisfied with answers that were not particularly specific, because based on the specifics he does offer in this affidavit, it's surprising that he would leave such things so open-ended. Tamara, another interesting point in this document, it does say that Dr. Murray did begin to administer CPR to Michael Jackson, and at one point left the room mid-CPR. He said he needed to get some help from Michael's security detail and walked away from a resuscitation effort. So that definitely stands out.
Courtney, that may be remembered in the 911 call. It wasn't Dr. Conrad who was Conrad Murray who was on there. It was an unidentified person who called and said that they had a person who was not breathing and unresponsive. But David and Courtney, you know, in this same search warrant, according to the LA Times, Dr. Murray said that he'd been treating Michael Jackson's insomnia for about 6 weeks and that he'd given Michael Jackson 50 milligrams of propofol every night using an IV, according to that court record. And we've reported and we've had experts on saying that there would be no reason for someone to administer that drug outside of a medical facility.
No reason. You're absolutely right. No reason whatsoever. And he does. We've been saying all along, obviously Michael had been given this drug before. In this affidavit, it says that 2 doctors in Germany gave it to him at some point. Michael passed that along to Dr. Murray, according to this. And we've been saying also, too, in this story, in the greater celebrity story behind it, when we talk about enablers, and you especially see it highlighted and underscored in cases of celebrity, but we know it happens in addiction all the time. But, you know, the enablers were the very physicians with the power to prescribe here. For 6 weeks, he was giving Michael Jackson propofol, and we know there's absolutely no good reason for that.
And Courtney and Tamron, maybe we should reset the table here for viewers who are just joining us. You're watching The Big Picture, and Tamron Hall and myself and Courtney Hazlett, we're covering the breaking news. The Associated Press is now reporting just a few minutes ago that the LA County Coroner's report has concluded that Michael Jackson's death was a homicide, that it was not accidental, but homicide suggests that Jackson would not have died, that there was an intentional and perhaps a negligent set of actions which caused his death. And Courtney Hazlett, I wonder, you mentioned that Dr. Conrad Murray, who's been under investigation ever since Jackson's death, he was treating Jackson for 6 weeks for sleeping, to try to help him sleep. How did they first meet each other? How did Conrad Murray come into essentially the Jackson circle?
Well, that's actually more clearly identified than we've ever really had before as well in these documents, David. It says that Murray met Michael Jackson when Michael was in Las Vegas and he was getting a cosmetic procedure for which he had propofol administered during the course of the procedure, and that's how the two of them first met. And it was shortly after that that he was asked to join Michael Jackson's team when it was time to get ready for the tour. So that question answered as well.
And Courtney, we just saw, it was the other day that Conrad Murray released that videotape saying that he was very appreciative of the concerns and kind of reached out via video to people that he says are supporting him. Interesting timing that then we would have this come out from the coroner.
It does seem all the more prescient, doesn't it? However, I don't think that the coroner gave Dr. Murray a heads up and said, okay, now if you want to ready up your HD video.
Yeah, but he could have known that the investigation was tightening. I mean, he was aware that they were coming and talking more to his attorney, I'm sure.
Definitely. I mean, the heat was definitely on as you saw search warrant after search warrant being executed. Dr. Murray's office, and then once you start to see them take place at Dr. Klein's office as well, there's no way that Dr. Murray wasn't feeling the heat under these circumstances.
All right, MSC's Courtney Hazlett. Courtney, thank you very much.